So now we have our whole main deck constructed. We want to focus on how we're going to sideboard with our control deck. And sideboarding with control decks, I find, is very different than sideboarding with most normal decks that exist. Similar to how we wanted to line up our threats against the opponent's answers, like if they're going to be running a bunch of creature removal, you want to present non-creatures to start, and then maybe in the sideboard you'll present creatures. This is where that whole strategy comes to fruition, where you're sort of adapting on the fly to what their plans are. The first thing to do is identify what kind of cards that your opponents are playing. If there's already a metagame established, figure out what kind of threats they're going to sideboard into, what kind of preemptive answers. Style of cards people bring in are duress and negate pretty frequently against control decks. If they have extra copies of discard, uncounterable creatures, these are the kinds of things that you need to be prepared for. When I'm looking to sideboard, I want to find not only additional answers to these various other cards my opponents are going to be bringing in. Again, if they have uncounterable creatures, maybe I want edicts or Wrath of God style effects or more spot removal. I also want to dance my threats around their answers. So what this ends up leading to is a lot of nuance in how the sideboarding actually happens. Take my Grixis control deck, for example. I tend to present Tasigur in game one, which is a very cheap creature threat, but point-click removal, like Path to Exile or Dismember, answers it pretty effectively. This is a really good strategy when most people aren't playing, cheap interaction that point-and-click kills a creature. This is much better when there's a lot of lightning bolts running around, for example. Well, when that is the case, trying to switch to a card in the sideboard that dodges the lightning bolts, the Path to Exiles, and the Dismembers is really effective. But it also needs to play into what your strategy is. At the end of the day, if the sideboard threat that I'm changing into doesn't make sense in a counterspell control deck, it needs to be so far above the bar that I can change what kind of control deck I'm presenting in game two, or it's just not going to fit. One of the examples I usually like is Young Pyromancer. It's something that plays into the counterspell approach. It's cheap. I can hold up counter magic with playing it, and even if my opponent tries to kill it, I can play some spells in response and make a bunch more tokens that they're potentially going to have to answer as I kill all of their creatures and attack them with these 2 tokens. This works similarly with different control decks. If you play a combo control deck, if you need to shave on part of the combo because your opponent's going to be hating on that, you could potentially present a tap-out style approach where you have a threat that goes way over the top of what your opponent's doing. You need to figure out, okay, what kind of interaction are they going to bring in to stop my combo, and what kind of threats that I can bring in that now dodges the cards they started with in their main deck, and the cards they're going to leave in after sideboarding, in addition to what they're going to be sideboarding in. All the while, you need to be focused on making sure your deck still has a cohesive package. As I was speaking to with the Young Pyromancer with my favorite kind of Grixis control strategy, it doesn't make sense for you to be a tap-out style control deck where you're tapping out for 4, 5, and 6 mana plays frequently, and then be boarding in a bunch of 3, 4, 5 mana counterspells. That's just not going to be an effective strategy. You're going to put yourself into a spot where your mana base doesn't actually function. It doesn't actually have the ability to make enough land drops on time to play these spells out. Similarly, you can't be switching up these threats in your sideboard and then breaking down of what you're doing with your mana base. If you're trying to play triple-double in your main deck of your, say, black-green control deck, if you have triple black and double green spells, you can't then all of a sudden say, oh, I'm going to board in this green card that scales off the number of forests I have. Well, your main deck wants to play more swamps than forests. That's just not going to end up working. Another one of the things I love to do in sideboarding is have a variety of answers and a variety of threats. Not just the one pinpointed, oh, this is good for this reason with my deck, but the games in Control are going to go very long. As a result, you get to see a lot more of your deck. Maybe you'll see half of your deck each game. Because of this, you can play these one-of style of cards and possibly ways to recur them where you can then leverage that effect in additional time. Especially the case, again, in my Grixis Control strategy, if I have just a single copy of an Edict in my deck, maybe it's Tribute to Hunger, for example, as it gains me life and it kills a creature, forcing my opponent to sacrifice it. These are 2 pretty unique effects that that style of deck doesn't usually get access to. If I can then flash it back with Snapcaster Mage or draw an additional time somehow from my graveyard, that gives me the ability to potentially use this spell 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 times throughout the course of a game when I only put 1 copy of that card into my deck. When you get to leverage stuff like that in control decks, it gives you this insurmountable advantage as long as you take the game long and you've really thought long and hard about what are the threats, what are the problems my opponent is answering, did I come up with the right solutions, did I build it in such a way that it fits into my mana base, and did I now change up my threats to dodge the other kind of removal, the other kind of interaction, the other kind of threats that my opponent has. Once you get that perfect storm going, that's when you're going to have built a really, really great control deck.